By the 90s, Japanese automakers seemed to be in a war with each other to see who could squeeze the most fun out of something that should technically be an economy car. Civic Si, Nissan NX, Integras, Celicas, these are but a few of the three-doors that we now look back on as hot hatches. But while most Japanese automakers were trying to figure out how to squeeze the most horsepower and revs out of a four-cylinder, Mazda said, well, what if we just shove a V6 in it? Mazda doesn't always think conventionally. After all, no one else was crazy enough to try to force rotary into mainstream. You see, to some, a car is mere transportation, a way to get from point A to point B. And for those people, there are crossovers. Oh, excuse me, I read that wrong. I'm quoting from the Canadian MX3 Precidia brochure here. Crossovers weren't really a thing yet. And for those people, there are any number of cars that will meet their needs, but for everyone else there's MasterCard or Mazda or whatever the hell it says. The point is, Mazda was trying something different with the MX3. Now when I was in high school, back in the 2000s, I remember a lot of girls wanting an MX3 or a Precidia, as they were called in Canada, as their first car. It seemed to be really popular with them. So they kind of developed a reputation for being a chick car. And at the time, I had no idea you could get a V6 in these things. Now you might be thinking, what kind of V6 would they put in an MX3? Well, meet Mazda's 1.8 liter V6, the second smallest displacement V6 ever used in a production car. Mitsubishi holds the title for the smallest displacement V6.
Why even bother to make a 6-cylinder if it's only going to have 4-cylinder displacement?
Well, 90s Mazda has a one-word answer for you. Smooth. With at least 3 O's. I think it's time we take a look back at the Mazda MX-3 because maybe those high school girls were onto something. Or maybe they just bought the MX-3 because they thought it was cute. But either way, let's dive into the MX-3 and see if just maybe it does deserve more recognition than it's been given. On sale for the 1992 model year, the MX-3 came in two trims, base and GS. The base model was powered by a single overhead cam 1.6-liter four-cylinder rated at 88 horsepower and 98 pound-feet of torque. A good reliable engine shared with the 323, but nothing really to write home about. If you were buying this car as a pure economy hatch, this is probably the trim you'd go with. The original MSRP for the base was somewhere between $11,000 and $12,000, making it comparable to around $27,000 today. Of course, for the equivalent of around $35,000 today, you could put yourself in a GS, powered by Mazda's new K8 dual overhead cam V6. This V6 adds 2 more cylinders, but only 0.2 of a liter more displacement. But redlining at a healthy 7K, this V6 made 130 horsepower and 115 pound-feet of torque. I know that's not a lot of torque for a V6, and peak torque output was 4,500 RPM, but Mazda used variable length intake manifold technology on this engine, which they called their Variable Resonance Induction System, or VRIS. Butterfly valves inside the intake tubes open and close at different RPMs to vary intake track length, keeping things optimal under different loads. Essentially, this design allows you to have a higher percentage of peak torque be retained across a longer RPM range. That's why, in many period reviews, they praised this V6 for being super smooth with a wide, flat power band. No on-off power or I can only pass people at certain RPMs going on here. The standard transmission is a 5-speed manual, but you could opt for a 4-speed auto on either trim. The GS uses 4-wheel disc brakes and ABS can be added as an option, while the base uses a front disc rear drum setup. The suspension is based on the 323, but tuned specifically for the MX-3, giving it a sporty feel and good handling, although I did read that these do have more body roll than you would expect. Over the base model, the GS adds a spoiler, rear and front, 15-inch alloy wheels, upgraded interior fabric, and a passenger door map pocket. On Canadian models, for the first few model years, the GS trim also grants you power windows, door locks, and cruise control, but you have to purchase those items as part of a power option package in the US and on later Canadian model years. A sunroof is a GS option and AC is a dealer option for either trim. Standard to the base model is power mirrors, a tachometer, map lights, a trunk light, a digital clock, a rear defroster, a 4-speaker cassette stereo, interior remote tailgate, and fuel door releases, and you know, much of that stuff wasn't necessarily a given on base model eco hatches in the early 90s. The styling. Well, from the front, to me, it looks like a better version of the Nissan NX. It's pretty rounded, even for an early 90s car, and this made it look pretty modern in its day. It doesn't necessarily look modern in 2026, but ew, who wants to look 2026 modern? On the rear, it's one of those really shallow sloped tailgates where the back glass is almost more of a moonroof than a rear window. It's kind of got a CRX style tailgate actually, but more rounded. Also similar to the CRX, it's got a little panel of vertical glass under the third brake light or under the spoiler if your MX-3 is so equipped. On Canadian models, there's actually lettering across the bottom of this glass that says Precidia, as these were marketed as MX-3 Precidias here. Being a hatch, it does have decent cargo room and a full cargo cover is standard. The seat backs fold down as one piece for even more cargo versatility, and it's probably the best way to keep these seats positioned since I don't imagine many adults or even teenagers fit too well back there. Better remember to call shotgun on this one. Shotgun! No, you fool, you can't call it now, you have to wait until the car is in view, that's the rules.
You know, if this was a modern hot hatch, sitting in the front wouldn't be so imperative, because the back seat would have its own doors, plenty of room, USB ports, maybe even climate vent.
Alright princess, we get it, the back seat is cramped. What about the front? Well, in typical 90s Japanese fashion, it's got a 3-dial gauge cluster, and I do like the sporty 3-spoke steering wheel. The layout of the dash is pretty standard for a Japanese car from this era, slider climate controls above the radio, there's nothing super noteworthy, but it's all good. I do have to say, I find the interior seat fabric a little cheap looking though, although I do like how the little MX-3 on the floor mats, the embroidery matches the accent color on the seats, at least for the base trim. They won't match on a GS trim because the supposedly upgraded fabric is like this weird multicolored assortment of threads. I'm seeing pink, I'm seeing blue, I'm seeing yellow. I think I might see shapes if I stare at this for long enough. I don't think it looks that good. It kind of to me just looks like someone dug out all the used thread scraps from the bottom of their grandma's sewing drawer to make this. Before we move on to 93, I want to point out one other thing about the 92 MX-3. It's one of very few Mazda models to use this OG version of Mazda's Eternal Flame logo. Now you probably remember this one, they didn't really use it for very long either, but this version actually came out in 1993. The original version was this one, which came on 1992 models, and it was more pointy, kind of more of a diamond shape. But Renault decided that they owned the diamond shape for some reason and said this logo was too similar to theirs. So Mazda had to update it for 93, and that's when we got this one, and so you'll see this more rounded logo on the hood and steering wheel of 93 MX-3s. But 92 MX-3s are one of very few Mazdas that made it to North America with this pointy design. The only other North American model I know for sure got the pointy badge was the 929. Another thing that happened in 1993 was a special edition model, which was made to celebrate Mazda's 25th year in Canada. They sold a special edition in the US as well, but it wasn't actually Mazda's 25th year in the US yet because believe it or not, Mazda actually entered the Canadian market first, with the R100 coupe going on sale in 1968 here. America wouldn't get this until 1970. Mazda's original Canadian headquarters, their first operations facility in North America, was actually not too far from me in Burnaby, British Columbia, but of course they've long since moved to Ontario. The special edition was limited to a run of just 2,000 units in Canada, and I think the same for the US, and it was basically a GS trim with leather seats, heated on the Canadian models, a leather-wrapped steering wheel and shift knob, and special Enkei produced 15-inch alloy wheels. Although this wasn't the exclusive color you could get them in, most of them were this raspberry metallic color. They must have figured out it was mostly teenage girls wanting these things.
Okay, so you don't look so hot on your driver's license. But hey, you can still look hot on the road. The new, more powerful Mazda MX-3.
In 1994, there are new wheel designs, and all MX-3s get dual front airbags as standard. Of course, this changes the steering wheel, but they also updated the dash design quite significantly. The new dash has a more driver's-oriented center stack that kind of angles towards you, and there are new round climate vents. I have to say, this dash actually looks cooler, I like it. There are also new, more standard-looking fabric patterns, and the one-piece seat backs have been changed to more conventional-style seats with separate headrests. ABS and the sunroof can now be optioned on either trim level, and the base model now has a dual overhead cam 4-cylinder, which increases its horsepower to 105 and torque to 100. A nice upgrade for the base model, but some people argue this hurt the V6 sales because this lessened the performance difference between the two trims. To be honest though, the V6 already wasn't selling that well. As cool as it is to have a V6 in a car like this, most people buying an economy car new are buying it because they need an economy car. They're usually going to pick the 4-cylinder because they want the cheaper maintenance and better fuel efficiency that goes with it. Not that the 1.8 liter V6 was super thirsty or anything, but it obviously didn't get quite as good mileage as the 4-cylinder. And if you did want performance, well, by the mid-90s, Honda and Toyota were getting a lot more power out of their 4-cylinders with the same displacements as Mazda's V6. In fact, 94 would be the last year you could get the V6 in the US, although in Canada, the Precidia was available with the V6 until its final 1995 model year. I don't know how many people bought it, but you could get it. Some markets actually kept this car around until 1998, and in different markets it was known by a few different names. In Australia, it was marketed as the Eunos 30X until 96, when it became the Eunos Mazda, because Mazda was cutting down on their different sub-brands by that time, and Eunos went defunct in 96. In Japan, it was sold through a couple different dealership channels, also through Eunos as the Eunos Presso, and through their Autozam brand as the AZ-3. So does anyone still drive these? Maybe now that you know more about them, you'll be inclined to save one. They don't pop up on Marketplace very often, but when they do, they tend to be pretty cheap. They don't exactly seem to be very sought after, but maybe they should be. Maybe you can save one.
Oh, no one wants to save that old junk. You're so stuck in the past.